I, Daniel Reeves, came to Jalpret looking for peace and isolation, but instead found something older than the village itself, something that moves through water, watches from the trees, and leaves wet footprints outside my door at night. I never believed in cursed places, even when my grandmother used to whisper stories about Jalpret, a small fishing village tucked along the southern coastline. I dismissed it all as superstition. She spoke of it like a place people forgot on purpose, left off maps, left out of conversation. I thought she was exaggerating. But when I finally found myself driving down a narrow coastal road toward that same village, I started to understand the weight of her words. The sky had been overcast for hours, a thick layer of clouds smothering the light, casting everything in a dull gray. The closer I got, the more the air changed. It smelled briny, but not fresh. There was a heaviness to it, like wet things left too long in the dark. I arrived just before dusk. Jalpret wasn't a town, not really. Just a scatter of old huts and crumbling stone homes stitched together by dirt paths and overgrown weeds. No shops, no school, no signboards. It felt like a place where time had stalled. A few villagers glanced up from behind their windows as I passed, their faces half-shadowed and unreadable. No one smiled. No one waved. It was unsettling, but I told myself they were just wary of outsiders. Still, the silence here wasn't normal. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that pressed in on your chest and made your skin itch. I found the guest house near the shore, if it could even be called that. The building looked like it had been abandoned years ago. Wooden planks weathered gray by salt air, roof slumped in the middle, and windows fogged over with grime. The man who handed me the key didn't ask for ID or payment up front. He barely spoke at all, just dropped the rusted key into my hand and muttered something I couldn't catch before retreating into the shadows. I watched him go, the back of his shirt soaked in damp patches. The inside of the house was worse. It smelled like mildew and old seawater. Every step I took sent creaks through the warped floorboards. A thin layer of dust coated everything, but the bed had clean sheets, oddly enough. I tossed my bag down and sat by the small window that overlooked the ocean. The shoreline stretched out like a forgotten graveyard, littered with decaying boats and twisted driftwood. The tide was high, and the waves slapped against the rocks with an irregular rhythm. I watched for a long time, trying to push away the gnawing sense of regret that had started to take root in my chest. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The wind picked up around midnight, whistling through the broken shutters like a low moan. I pulled the thin blanket tighter and turned on my side, facing the wall, trying to will myself into unconsciousness. Just as I began to drift, I heard something. A soft, dragging sound across the porch. It started faint, like a sack being pulled through gravel, and grew louder, closer. My heart thudded in my chest. I held my breath and strained to listen. The sound paused, then started again slower this time, as if whatever it was had grown tired. I told myself it was probably a stray animal, a dog, maybe. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal. The screen glowed weakly, then faded as I set it down. I got up, walked to the door, and locked it, just for peace of mind. Then, hesitating, I dragged a wooden chair over and wedged it beneath the handle. I stood there for a while longer, listening. Silence. I returned to bed, but didn't sleep. When morning came, I stepped outside, half convinced I'd find nothing. But the porch was damped more than the morning dew could explain, and there, in the soft layer of sand that had blown up onto the wood, were footprints, small ones, bare feet. They weren't mine. I followed them with my eyes as they led across the porch and disappeared into the thick bushes near the side of the house. They were fresh, unbroken, as if whoever or whatever left them had just walked through. There was something off about their shape. They looked human, but the toes were long, almost fused together, like they belonged to someone who had spent far too much time in the water. I didn't follow them. I just stood there, staring at the trail until the breeze began to erase them. The sea looked darker that morning. I spent most of the morning convincing myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe someone had been playing a prank. Maybe the footprints had been warped by the sand and moisture, made to look stranger than they really were. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I hadn't seen a single child in Jalpret, not one. And the way the villagers stared through me instead of at me like I wasn't really there kept looping in my mind. No one had come to the house. No one had reason to. Yet the prints were fresh, and the shape of them, it haunted me. I walked to the shoreline again, trying to shake the sense of unease. The air was heavier than the day before, thick and damp. The tide was lower now, revealing jagged rocks and heaps of rotting seaweed along the beach. There was an abandoned boat lodged in the sand, its hull cracked open and half swallowed by earth. I climbed onto it to get a better view of the ocean. From there, I noticed something I hadn't seen yesterday, a wooden cross sticking out of the sand further down the shore, weathered and half-tilted. I walked to it slowly. No name was etched into the surface, but red thread had been wrapped tightly around its base, fraying at the ends. It didn't feel like a grave. It felt like a warning. Back at the house, I tried to distract myself by cleaning, wiping the windows and picking up old scraps of seaweed that had somehow blown inside. As I was sweeping near the back door, I saw a shape through the grimy glass, someone standing still at the tree line behind the house. my breath caught in my throat. I leaned forward, squinting, but the figure stepped back and vanished behind the brush. Before I could make out any features, I ran outside, scanning the woods, but there was no one, just the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of waves. That night, the wind returned. It scratched at the walls like dry fingers. Around midnight, I was startled awake by a soft, rhythmic tapping. It came from the window beside my bed, 5 knocks, spaced evenly, followed by silence. I lay frozen, staring at the glass, afraid to move. The tapping resumed. I forced myself to sit up, every muscle tight with dread, and shone my phone's flashlight at the window. There was nothing there, but the glass was smeared. 5 long dripping smudges ran down from the top, streaked as if something wet had dragged its fingers across. My breath fogged the air. It was colder now, unnaturally so. I stepped back, keeping the beam of light steady, and noticed something caught in the cracked wood of the window frame, long strands of black hair. They swayed slightly in the breeze, heavy with moisture. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the center of the room, all the lights on, watching the door and windows like something might crawl through at any moment. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, made my heart race. At one point, I thought I heard whispering low and garbled, like someone speaking through water, but when I pressed my ear to the wall, it stopped. When the sky finally began to lighten, I opened the front door to let in air. The salty breeze carried the faint scent of decay, and the sky was a washed-out gray. The footprints had returned. This time, they were all around the porch, overlapping, moving in circles, like someone or something had been pacing. I stood there, barefoot, staring at the pattern. They weren't the size of an adult's feet. They were small, maybe the size of a child's, but the toes were long, fused like flippers, and the heels left no clear mark. The sand around them was darker, damp as though soaked from the inside out. I followed them a few steps toward the edge of the porch, before they veered off sharply toward the underbrush and disappeared again. I thought about packing up and leaving, but something inside me hesitated, a mixture of fear and something else, curiosity, maybe a need to know what was really happening in Jalpret. As I turned to go back inside, I saw movement just beyond the trees again, a flash of pale skin, then nothing. I didn't chase it this time. I just watched the trees, waiting. The air had turned sour, not just in smell, but in feeling, like the wind carried something sick with it. The sea no longer looked blue or gray, but a thick, dull black. It churned constantly now, even when the wind died down. Something was shifting beneath the surface. The longer I stayed in Jalpret, the more wrong everything felt. Time moved slower, the light faded earlier than it should. Even my reflection in the window looked off, paler, as though something was slowly draining the color out of me. I barely ate that day. My appetite had vanished. I kept going back to the window to check if the footprints had returned, but they hadn't. Not yet. Instead, something else appeared. Around noon, I noticed the ground near the back of the house was wet again, the grass flattened in a trail that led into the woods. I hadn't gone far back there yet, not beyond where I'd seen the figure the day before. But now something compelled me to follow. I found the old path hidden behind thick reeds and brambles, half covered in moss. It led toward the coast, but took a winding, more concealed route through the trees. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. There were no birds, no insects, not even wind. Just the sound of my own footsteps pressing into damp earth. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. The path opened into a clearing near the shore. There, the ground was soft and black, like wet ash, and rising from it were wooden crosses, at least a dozen, all weather-worn, crooked, and tangled in red thread, just like the one I'd seen earlier on the beach. None had names, no markers, just thread and decay. Some were half swallowed by the mud, others leaning like they were giving up. The earth around them seemed to ripple faintly, as if the ground itself was breathing. I stared for a long time, not daring to move. Then something wet hit the back of my neck. I jumped, instinctively brushing it off, and looked up. Nothing above me. No tree, no branch, just the wide gray sky. But more droplets followed. Cold, heavy, not like rain. These drops came in slow, isolated taps, spaced seconds apart, falling from nowhere. I backed away, my shoes sinking slightly in the black soil, and the ground made a faint sucking sound with each step. Something about it reminded me of flesh. I don't know why, but it did. I turned and walked quickly back down the path, not running, not yet, afraid that if I did, I might hear something chasing me. Back at the house, I locked every door and window again. The daylight was still present, but it felt thin, like a layer of film over a rotting picture. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process what I'd seen. Who buried those crosses? Why were they unmarked? What did the red thread mean? I checked my phone again, still no signal. I tried turning on the radio, flipping through static and dead air until I found something faint, a voice, or what might have been a voice, buried under waves of static and garbled distortion. It came and went in strange patterns. Sometimes I thought I heard words, but they dissolved before I could make sense of them. Then, just before I turned it off, there was a sharp screech, followed by the sound of something bubbling, like a recording of someone drowning. That night, the sea was louder than ever. The crashing waves sounded closer, more violent. The wind came in bursts, rattling the windows like fists pounding from the outside. I didn't dare sleep. I sat in the corner of the room with a flashlight, knees drawn to my chest. Just after 2 a.m., the dragging sound returned. I heard it clearly this time, not from the porch, but inside the house. It was moving slowly down the hallway. Wet footsteps, one after another, then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Something tapped at the bedroom door. 5 knocks, then nothing. I waited until dawn before I moved. When I finally opened the door, there were puddles leading down the hall, Wakler, fresh water, still glistening in the morning light. My shoes were soaked, so was the doormat. I followed the puddles back to the front door, which was locked from the inside. The chair I'd used to brace it was still in place. But outside the door, beneath the window frame, I saw another long strand of wet black hair, caught in a nail. And this time, it wasn't alone. There were 2. I stopped trying to rationalize things after that night. The second strand of hair broke something in me. I had hoped, up until then, that I was just unraveling maybe the stress, the isolation, the strange village. But that hair, I hadn't imagined it. It clung to my fingers, cold and damp like it had just come out of water. The 2 strands were twisted together loosely, and I couldn't help but think of them like veins or threads leading back to something larger, something alive. I threw them into the fireplace and lit a match. They sizzled, curling and shrinking until they were gone. But the smell they left behind wasn't like burning hair. It was fouler, like brine and rot, like something dead dragged from the ocean floor. I didn't leave the house that day. I didn't even step outside. The villagers had stopped pretending not to see me. The few times I looked out the window, I saw 1 or 2 of them just standing there, far off, near the trees, never walking, never moving, just watching, their bodies perfectly still, faces unreadable from that distance. I kept the curtains shut after that. I couldn't stand the feeling of being observed. At around 3 in the afternoon, the electricity cut out. The lights dimmed and died in one long flicker. My phone was already dead. No service, no signal, and now no light except for the flashlight and candles I'd found in the kitchen drawer. I lit 3 and placed them on the floor in the center of the room, where I sat for hours, listening. There were sounds now, new ones, gentle knocks coming from under the floorboards, like something tapping from below. Not rhythmic, not threatening, just a presence making itself known. The house had begun to breathe. I could feel it in the walls, hear it in the faint creaks that didn't come from wind or age. When night came, it brought the storm. The wind didn't howl anymore, it screamed. The rain came in sheets, slamming against the walls like fists. But worse than all of it was the ocean. It sounded impossibly close, like the waves had swallowed the shore and were climbing up toward the house. I thought it might flood. I thought any second the whole place would be swept away, but it didn't. The water never came. Just the sound of it, violent and churning, crashing again and again. I sat in the corner with my back to the wall, flashlight in one hand, a candle burning near my feet. Then, I heard footsteps above me, not on the porch, not down the hallway. Above, there was no attic. I knew there wasn't. I had checked the entire house on the first day. There was no upper floor. Yet something was walking directly over my head, slow and deliberate. The ceiling groaned beneath the weight. I watched the plaster as dust began to fall in thin lines, each footstep sending down another shiver of debris. Then the candle flickered and went out. The flashlight dimmed to a dying beam and the walking stopped. I sat in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat, counting the seconds. I waited for the next sound, the next signal, but all I heard was the sea. And then, quietly, from somewhere behind the walls, the same gurgled whisper I'd heard before. It wasn't speaking to me. It was chanting low, watery syllables, spoken in a language I couldn't understand. It rose and fell like a tide, timed perfectly with the sound of distant waves. The whispering continued for hours, sometimes louder, sometimes barely audible. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. When I woke, it was early morning. The house was silent again. Still, but something had changed. The floor in front of the bedroom door was wet, not soaked, just damp in a perfect semicircle, like someone had stood there dripping. I stepped over it and opened the front door slowly, afraid of what I'd see. The entire ground outside was covered in a thin film of seawater, shimmering, unmoving, reflecting the pale gray sky. As I stepped out onto the porch, I noticed something lying in the grass, something small, almost childlike. It was a toy boat, wooden, handmade, covered in red thread wrapped tightly around its hull. Inside, nailed to the center with a rusty pin, was a single human fingernail. I stood frozen on the porch, staring at the toy boat lying in the wet grass. The red thread was soaked, darkened like blood, and the tiny fingernail nailed into the center didn't look old. It was pinkish, with a sliver of skin still clinging to the base. My breath felt trapped in my chest. I wanted to believe it was some cruel joke or warning, but I knew better. The boat hadn't been there yesterday. Someone or something had placed it there during the night. The villagers were gone. The road that passed through Jalpret was empty, the houses dark. It was like the entire village had simply stopped. I walked through it slowly, calling out a few times even though I knew no one would answer. Doors hung ajar, curtains swayed in windows with no wind. I passed a small open square near the broken dock and saw something else, an old well in the center, wrapped in layers of red thread, just like the crosses in the toy. A damp trail of footprints circled it. Small fused toes pressed deep into the dirt. I turned back toward the guest house, moving faster now. I had decided to leave. I didn't care if my car was working or not. I'd walk if I had to, anything to escape the pull this place had over me. But when I returned to the house and stepped inside, something had changed. My bag was on the floor, wide open, and everything had been taken out. My clothes were soaked, scattered in a perfect circle around the bed. In the center of the mattress sat another wooden boat, this one smaller, no thread, just a single, long strand of black hair coiled around its sail. I picked it up with shaking fingers. It was cold, too cold, like it had just come out of the sea. I packed everything I could and ran to the car. The engine coughed, then started. Relief hit me like a wave. I reversed down the narrow road as fast as I could, not looking back at the house. The trees leaned closer than they had before, their branches hanging like limp arms. I didn't stop until the village was behind me. But 10 minutes later, the car shuddered and died. The forest had closed in around me. The road ahead looked twisted, unfamiliar, like it had changed direction while I wasn't looking. I stepped out, heart pounding, and walked ahead to see if there was any turn or clearing. That's when I saw her. She stood just off the road, maybe 30 feet away, half hidden in the trees. Long black hair soaked and hanging over her face. Her arms dangled at her sides, unmoving. Her head tilted slowly, like a puppet's, until it hung at a sickening angle. I blinked. She was closer. I didn't hear her move. I didn't see her take a step. But she had. Just a few feet closer. I ran back to the car, slammed the door, and locked it. I stared out the windshield. Empty. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. She was behind the car. Her face was visible now. Bloated, pale eyes, wide and black like deep water. Her mouth hung open but no sound came out. Just a stream of seawater that ran down her chin and dripped onto the ground. My vision blurred. My chest tightened. I don't remember passing out, but when I opened my eyes again it was night. I was still in the car. Alone, the forest was dead silent. The engine started like nothing had happened. I drove for hours, not stopping until I saw signs of live street lights, gas stations, people. I never spoke to anyone about Jalpret. I never went back, but I never really left, either. Every night, just after 2 a.m. I wake up without knowing why. Always the same time. Always the same chill in the air. 2 nights ago I found something at my doorstep, a small puddle of seawater. No rain that day, no leaks. Next to it was a wooden toy boat, wrapped in red thread.